All right, so we're really diving deep this time with this book. You've been sharing excerpts from The Psychology of Money by Morgan Housel. And right away, I got to say, this isn't your typical personal finance book, with all the talk about spreadsheets and stock tips.
Not at all.
It's way more about the ways we act around money, the good, the bad, the just plain weird. Like, it's really about the human side of our finances.
Exactly. Housel's argument is that getting inside our own heads, like really understanding our psychology and the biases we have, so way more important for financial success than trying to find some kind of magic formula.
Right. It's about knowing yourself as much as knowing the markets. And one of the things that really jumped out at me was how much Housel focuses on our relationship with money being like deeply personal. He's got this story about a high-flying executive, right, throwing cash around like it grows on trees.
Oh, yeah. I remember that one.
And then he ends up totally broke.
Yeah, that story is a great example. It's like, you've got this executive, right, who's used to a certain lifestyle, and then on the other hand, you've got Ronald Reed, the janitor, who quietly builds up millions.
And nobody even knew.
Exactly. And it just goes to show that knowing a bunch of financial facts and actually behaving in a financially savvy way are two different things altogether.
Yeah. You can be book smart, but not street smart.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Housel's point is that the environment you grow up in, like if you live through a recession or a boom time, it all shapes how you see money and risk and what you think is normal financially.
Totally. Like someone who grew up during the Depression versus someone who's only seen good times.
Exactly. Someone who lived through tough times might hold on to their money more tightly, even if they're successful later on. And then you've got people who've only known good times. They might be more willing to take financial risks.
Yeah.
Housel's point is that what one person thinks is totally irrational could make perfect sense to someone else just because of their backgrounds.
It's like their own personal financial logic.
Exactly. And you can't just ignore that.
It's funny you mentioned irrational behavior because that section on lottery tickets, that got me thinking it's so easy to judge someone who spends a good chunk of their paycheck on lottery tickets. But Housel kind of makes you see things from their perspective. Like for someone living paycheck to paycheck, that lottery ticket, it's like their one shot at the financial dream.
That's such a good point. It's not always about logic, right? Emotions play a huge role. How we see ourselves, all that factors in.
And then there's that whole luck thing. Housel talks about Bill Gates and this equally brilliant friend of his, Ken Evans, who unfortunately died young. And it just shows how much of an impact just pure chance can have on your life and your finances, too.
Absolutely. Housel wants us to really think about the role of luck, good and bad.
Yeah.
It's too easy to say someone's successful just because they're skilled or that someone failed just because they made bad choices. Life throws curveballs, right? Unexpected things happen, and sometimes those things have a bigger impact on our finances than we'd like to admit.
So it's not enough to just make the so-called right moves. You also got to be around long enough to actually see them pay off, which I guess is where risk management comes in.
Exactly. He makes this analogy with card counting. Even if you're really good at it, like you have a statistical edge, one bad hand can wipe you out if you bet everything.
Ouch.
Yeah, that's a tough break.
It's all about managing your risk, not putting all your eggs in one basket, so to speak. You got to stay in the game long enough for luck to swing your way.
Right. Make sure you can weather the storm.
Speaking of having enough, there's that story about John Bogle, the founder of Vanguard. Remember, he's at this party with Kurt Vonnegut, and they're talking about the billionaire hosting the party.
Oh, yeah. And Vonnegut says he has something that billionaire will never have enough.
Which is such a powerful statement because here's this billionaire right at the pinnacle of financial success. And yet,
according to Vonnegut, he's missing something crucial.
It's like that saying, money can't buy you happiness. Exactly. Housel uses that story to show how chasing more can actually backfire. It's like running on a treadmill. You're putting in all this effort, but you're not really getting anywhere.
And it's like there's always another level, right? He tells that story about Rajat Gupta, this super successful CEO who ends up in prison for insider trading just because he wanted to break into that billionaire circle. It's like, even when you have crazy wealth, it's never enough. There's always someone richer.
It really makes you think about what enough really means, doesn't it? It's not about a specific number. It's about being content with what you have. It's about recognizing that true wealth isn't always about material possession.
Yeah, it's about freedom and options. It's about having peace of mind.
Exactly. And sometimes that's worth more than all the money in the world.
So are you saying that some of the richest people are actually the ones who are happiest with what they've got instead of constantly chasing after more?
I think there's definitely something to that. And it's a concept that Housel digs into even deeper when he talks about the power of compounding.
compounding, that's the whole eighth wonder of the world thing, right?
That's the one. And to illustrate it, Housel uses the example of Warren Buffett. Now, most people think Buffett made his fortune from picking amazing stocks.
Yeah. Isn't he supposed to be like this investing genius?
He is. But that's not the whole story. You see, most of his wealth didn't come from picking winners. It came from starting young and letting his returns compound over like 70 years. Time makes a huge difference.
Wow, 70 years. That's longer than most people even live. So you're telling me that someone as successful as Warren Buffett made most of his money just by starting early and letting it grow.
It seems counterintuitive, right? But that's the power of compounding. It's not always about making flashy moves. It's about consistency and patience. To really drive this point home, he compares Buffett to this hedge fund guy, Jim Simons, who made insanely high returns.
So Simons was making way more than Buffett.
Way more. But here's the thing. Simon started investing much later in life. So even with those incredible returns, he's not even close to as wealthy as Buffett. It all comes back to time.
It's like that snowball effect, you see. You start with a tiny snowball, and as you roll it down the hill, it gets bigger and bigger. It picks up more snow along the way. That's compounding in action.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
It perfectly captures how a small difference compounded over time can lead to huge results.
So the earlier you start, the better, right?
Exactly. Even small amounts can make a big difference in the long run. It's not about trying to get rich quick. It's about playing the long game.
Makes sense. So we've talked about starting early, but what about saving? It seems like everyone talks about saving, but Housel presents it in a different light.
He does. He challenges this idea that saving is about depriving yourself. He says that how much you save can actually be more impactful than how much money you make. And he uses a really interesting comparison to explain this, the 1970s oil crisis. Remember that?
Vaguely, wasn't that when gas prices went through the roof?
Yeah. And we didn't solve it by just magically finding more oil.
Yeah.
We adapted. We became more energy efficient. We learned to do more with less.
So instead of focusing on making more, we should be thinking about using what we have more wisely.
Exactly. And that's what saving is all about.
Yeah.
It gives you the flexibility to live the life you want, whether that's retiring early, taking a career risk, or just having that peace of mind knowing you're prepared if something unexpected happens.
So it's not just about hoarding money, it's about creating options and freedom.
Exactly. And that's what we'll be diving into in part 2 of our deep dive into the psychology of money. So we were talking about saving being more about freedom than deprivation.
Yeah, it's like giving your future self more choices, right? Instead of thinking, I can't afford to do that, it's more like, hey, if I save this now, I can totally do that later.
That's a great way to think about it. It's about having the flexibility to pursue opportunities later on, whether it's a dream trip, a career change, or just having a safety net for those unexpected curveballs life throws at you.
Exactly. It's like you're not saying no to yourself, you're just saying not yet.
Exactly. And that brings me to an example that always stuck with me. Housel talks about this valet who was driving all these fancy cars for his clients.
Oh, yeah, I think I remember that one. What was his deal again?
Well, on the surface, he looked successful, right? Driving these high-end cars.
Yeah, I bet people made a lot of assumptions about him.
Exactly. But the reality was he was drowning in debt. He was living way above his means just to keep up appearances.
It's like that saying, don't judge a book by its cover.
Exactly. True wealth isn't about flashy cars or designer clothes. It's about financial security, having that peace of mind, knowing you're in control of your money.
And that peace of mind comes from making smart decisions, living within your means, saving diligently.
Absolutely. It's about building a strong financial foundation, even if it's not always Instagram worthy.
And that reminds me, Housel also talks about this idea of room for error in your finances. What does that actually look like in practice?
That's a question a lot of people have. And honestly, it's something a lot of people overlook. It's not about being overly cautious or avoiding every risk. It's about accepting that life is unpredictable.
So you're saying stuff happens and you gotta be prepared.
Exactly. It's about having a buffer for when those unexpected expenses come up, whether it's a medical bill or your car breaking down, or maybe you lose your job. Having an emergency fund being adequately insured, these things give you that cushion to handle those bumps in the road without derailing your whole financial plan.
It's like having a safety net for your finances.
Exactly. It's about being prepared for the unexpected so you're not caught off guard.
Which kind of makes you think about how your future self might have different needs and goals. I mean, we're constantly changing and evolving, right? What I want and need today isn't necessarily what future me will want or need.
That's such a great point, and it ties into what Housel calls the end of history illusion. It's this idea that we tend to think of ourselves as static, like who we are today is who we'll always be. But of course, that's not true at all. Our values, our goals, our risk tolerance, it all changes over time.
It's like when you look back at pictures of yourself from a few years ago and you're like, what was I thinking with that outfit?
Exactly. Our tastes change and our financial priorities do too.
Mhm.
So when you're making decisions about your money, it's not enough to just think about who you are right now. You got to try to anticipate the needs and desires of your future self too.
Okay, but how do you even begin to do that? How do you make decisions today that align with the goals and values of a future you don't even know yet?
That's where having a financial plan comes in, but not just any plan. It's got to be a flexible one that can adapt as your life changes.
So it's like having a roadmap, but being open to taking detours along the way.
Exactly. Housel stresses the importance of reviewing and updating your financial plan regularly, just like you might update your wardrobe as your style evolves.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's not about locking yourself into a rigid plan. It's about creating a framework that can guide you while still allowing for flexibility and adjustments along the way.
Absolutely. And that's where understanding your own psychology, your own relationship with money is so important. Even the best laid plans can go off track if you're not aware of your own emotional biases and tendencies.
That's so true. Speaking of emotions and money, one thing that really resonated with me was Housel's point about aiming for reasonable over rational when it comes to financial decisions. What's the difference and why does it matter?
That's a really insightful question, and it's a distinction that a lot of people miss. Being rational means making decisions based purely on logic and data. But as humans, we're not always driven by pure logic, are we? Emotions play a role. Our gut feelings, even our upbringing, all those things factor into our decisions.
So it's like that saying, the heart wants what the heart wants.
Well, not exactly, but it's about recognizing that our emotions are part of the equation. And that's okay. Housel argues that it's more important to be reasonable, which means finding a balance between what makes sense on paper and what feels right in your gut.
He tells that great story about Harry Markowitz, the Nobel Prize-winning economist, who, when it came to his own retirement investments, opted for a simple 50-50 split between stocks and bonds.
Exactly. Even though his own complex formulas probably suggested a different approach, he went with what felt comfortable and sustainable for him. And that's key, because if you're constantly stressed and anxious about your investments, you're less likely to stick with your plan over the long haul.
So it's about finding that balance between making smart financial moves and maintaining your own emotional well-being.
Exactly. You got to be able to sleep at night.
Right. No one wants to be a nervous wreck over their money.
Yeah.
So how do you find that sweet spot?
Well, that's something we'll delve into in the final part of our deep dive into the psychology of money. So we were talking about finding that sweet spot between making smart financial moves and taking care of your emotional well-being.
Right, because let's face it, money can be stressful, especially when things aren't going according to plan.
Absolutely. And that's what we're going to unpack in this final part of our deep dive. How do you deal with those inevitable setbacks and keep moving forward?
Because let's be real, life rarely goes perfectly right. There are always bumps in the road, unexpected expenses, market downturns, you name it.
Exactly. And Housel's point is that it's not about avoiding setbacks altogether, because that's nearly impossible. It's about how you respond to those setbacks that really matters.
So it's about having a game plan, a way to navigate those rough patches without letting them completely throw you off course.
You got it. And one of the biggest things Housel emphasizes is maintaining a long-term perspective. That can be really tough when you're in the thick of it, though.
Oh, totally. Like when the market takes a nosedive and your portfolio is shrinking, it's easy to freak out, right?
Exactly. Your gut instinct is to cut your losses and sell everything before it gets any worse.
Oh, yeah, I've been there. It's panic mode.
But Housel reminds us that those short-term market swings, they're just blips on the radar when you're thinking long-term. It's like zooming out and seeing the bigger picture.
So it's about not letting your emotions make decisions for you.
Exactly. It takes discipline to stick to your plan, even when it feels like everything is falling apart.
It's like you got to be the adult in the room when it comes to your finances.
Exactly. So how do you cultivate that discipline? Housel suggests a few things. One is to focus on what you can control.
Right. We talked about that before. It's easy to get caught up in things you can't control, like interest rates or the global economy, but ultimately those are outside of our control.
Exactly. So shift your focus to what you can control: your savings rate, your investment strategy, even your spending habits. Those are things you have direct influence over.
So it's about focusing on the things you can actually do something about, rather than stressing over the things you can't.
Exactly. Another strategy Housel suggests is reframing your perspective. Instead of dwelling on the negative, what if you look for the lessons learned?
Oh, I like that. It's like turning those setbacks into opportunities for growth.
Exactly. It's about asking yourself, what can I learn from this experience? How can I use this to make better decisions in the future?
It's like that saying, every cloud has a silver lining.
I love that. It's about adopting a growth mindset. Instead of viewing setbacks as failures, you see them as opportunities for learning and development.
That's so important because it's easy to get stuck in that cycle of self-blame and regret.
Absolutely. It's about shifting your focus from, I can't believe this happened, to, okay, what can I do differently next time?
So it's about taking action and moving forward rather than getting bogged down in the past.
Exactly. And that brings us back to a key theme in the psychology of money. It's not just about understanding the numbers. It's about understanding the psychology, the emotions that drive our financial decisions.
It's about that human element we talked about before. We all have these biases and tendencies that shape how we think about and manage money.
Absolutely. And once you're aware of those biases, you can start to make more intentional choices, choices that are aligned with your values, your goals, your overall vision for your life.
It's like becoming the CEO of your own financial life.
Exactly. You've got to have a clear vision, a solid plan, and the resilience to weather those inevitable storms.
And just like a good CEO, you've got to be able to make tough decisions even when it's uncomfortable.
Exactly. It's about taking control of your financial well-being rather than letting your emotions or external circumstances dictate your choices.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into the psychology of money, what's one key takeaway you hope listeners will remember?
If there's one thing I hope you take away from this, it's that financial success isn't just about being good at math or following some complicated formula. It's about understanding yourself. It's about knowing your strengths, your weaknesses, your tendencies, and using that self-awareness to make smarter decisions.
It's about taking control of your financial journey and creating a life that's both prosperous and fulfilling.
Exactly. It's about aligning your money with your values and using it as a tool to build the life you want.
I love that. Well said. And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive into the psychology of money. I hope you found this conversation as insightful and thought-provoking as I did. Remember, the journey to financial well-being is a marathon, not a sprint.
That's so true.
So be kind to yourself, stay curious, and keep learning. And most importantly, enjoy the journey.